Hi, this is Shelby Morrison, music historian, resident rebel girl, and VP of Curatorial Operations at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You're listening to Into the Vault, a mini podcast within a podcast where I get to nerd out about an artifact inspired by Kathleen Hanna's conversation in the main podcast, Music Makes Us. In this episode, Kathleen got to talk to one of my favorite artists, Shirley Manson of Garbage. I met Shirley at the museum years ago, and we talked about how we could help bring attention to the excellence and importance of women in rock and roll, specifically Black and brown women, and we've been co-conspirators ever since. When researching revolutionary women, we had to look into the history of women separately, because the continuum of storytelling in books and more focuses way more on men in rock and roll. The reality is, all these artists were creating during the same time period, but because the artists were women or people of color, they were quote-unquote allowed to create, but weren't marketed or afforded the same opportunities to find success as white male artists. This does not diminish or lessen their contributions. In fact, most of the time, their music was re-recorded by white men, and it was their versions that were viewed as pioneering. There's room for us all, and Shirley agrees. Shirley attended the opening of Revolutionary Women in Music at our museum in Cleveland, Ohio. At the event, she gave an incredibly empowering speech about the importance of the exhibit and the work that we still need to do. Let's take a listen.
The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is attending to some important, urgent work. This is something really good, something necessary and long overdue. I come here to pay my respects and to acknowledge the significant work of all the brilliant, formidable female musicians who have come before me, upon whose mighty shoulders I stand. Most notably, the talents of so many Black and brown female artists whose trailblazing contributions to music has so often been conveniently ignored and forgotten by a music industry run mostly by men, striving to appease the tastes, mostly, of other men. So it's deliciously satisfying to me to witness here the glory of collective female expression in all its various forms and facets. The myriad of different ways in which women choose to creatively express themselves, their perspectives, skill, and wisdom. How women are represented in music directly affects the way women are viewed and valued in our society. Educating the public goes a long way to help engender equity and respect, two vitally important components towards safeguarding women's rights and their futures. I'm so grateful, so relieved that this important institution is finally choosing to tell the stories that belong to and represent all of us. Thank you for your patience. So much love. Thank you.
Shirley Manson is definitely someone you want in your corner. What an amazing speech! In last week's episode, she and Kathleen struck a similar note, talking about how age and gender intersect and shape their experiences. Their conversation was so honest and powerful. It's cool to hear them talk about how they inspired each other early in their careers and how they're still inspiring each other with their work today. You don't always know who will be impacted by your art and activism or the waves that it can create further down the line. Which brings me to the topic of today's minisode, an artist who has been inspiring musicians and poets for over 50 years. In the show, Kathleen and the guests frequently talk about how awkward it is to be called an icon. But on this episode of Into the Vault, it is not a hyperbole to say that we are talking about one of the most iconic women in music. The poet, the myth, the legend, the godmother of punk, 2007 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee, Patti Smith. With her words, sound, and style, Patti Smith has influenced artists across generations and genre, from Madonna to R.E.M. to Rosalia. Her memoir, Just Kids, was a New York Times bestseller and winner of the National Book Award for nonfiction. She started performing her poetry in the 1960s and hasn't stopped writing since. Patti Smith is an artist ahead of her time, bringing a poetic sensibility to raw, street-level rock and roll. She achieved success on her own terms with honest passion that was the antithesis of the era's slick arena rock. A devout reader of French symbolist poetry, she strove to capture its mystical spirit in a rock and roll context. Inspired by Bob Dylan, Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, Allen Ginsberg, and more, she began reading her poems at New York bookstores, accompanied by rock critic and musician Lenny Kaye, improvising on electric guitar. Patti Smith went to New York City in 1967, and by 1974, she had formed the Patti Smith Group. Her first single, 1974's Hey Joe, backed by Piss Factory, was the first truly independent release of rock's new age. The following year, the band released their first album, Horses, fusing punk rock and spoken poetry. The album opens with a cover of Van Morrison's Gloria, and Patti growling the immortal line, "Jesus died for somebody's sins, but not mine." Patti embraced her outsider image, saying, quote, "My aim with my album Horses was to let outsiders like me, the weird kids, the gay kids, the kids whose parents disowned them, know that they weren't alone." Smith went on to say, "The most important thing as a performer is to offer a transformative experience to others. I want people to leave our concerts feeling invigorated to do their own work, start their own band, write their own poetry, go out on the streets and protest, or vote," end quote. Smith followed Horses with the even more experimental and extreme Radio Ethiopia. The following year, she released Easter, which yielded the top 20 hit, Because the Night. This was one of the earliest new wave hits and was co-written with Bruce Springsteen. When inducting entrepreneur Jimmy Iovine into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2022, Bruce talked about how Iovine took a scrap of the song Because the Night and asked if Patti could finish it and record the song. Of course, Bruce said yes, and then reflected that he didn't have the guts to turn Because the Night into a love song, but Patti did. Much of her work is like that, love songs and love letters to the people who inspire her. After releasing her fourth album, 1979's Wave, Smith took a break from the public eye, focusing on her marriage to 2024 inductee Fred Sonic Smith, the former guitarist of the MC5, and their two children. In 1988, Patti resurfaced with Dream of Life, which included the rousing anthem People Have the Power. She continued to release albums until 2012, and in more recent years has published several memoirs and books of poetry. However, for the artifact that we are talking about today, we're rewinding all the way back to that first tour in support of her debut album, Horses. This artifact is an Atlanta Braves baseball jacket that Patti wore on the tour. The jacket shows Smith's androgynous style, which influenced the street fashion of the late 1970s. Her look embraced both rock and roll and New York's downtown aesthetic via threadbare jackets, ripped t-shirts, and army boots. Typically, when we play this game on the show, it takes a few clues and a bit of conversation to get to the right answer. But in this episode, once the artifact was revealed, in true Shirley Manson fashion, there was no beating around the bush. Shirley placed the item immediately.
So we're going to see an image of some kind of item, and we don't have to say,
Patti Smith.
"Oh my God." Okay, well, I guess this was a great time with you, Shirley. Okay, you automatically said Patti Smith. I would not have guessed that. Why do you think that this is Patti Smith?
I've seen photographs of her wearing it, but also this is a real like fancy pants answer. But Tina Weymouth took a Braves jacket and put it over my shoulders when I was recording with my middle band. So I have three bands in my life, and so I was in a band called Good Brothers Mackenzie. Then I was in a band called Angelfish. When I was in Angelfish, I was recording a record with Chris Frantz and Tina Weymouth. And when I was recording my vocals, Tina would come into the vocal booth and drape this Braves jacket over me, and she would say, "That's Patti's vibes." And she would leave the room. And so that's how I know that's Patti Smith's gear.
She, of course, was spot on. What she didn't know was that Tina and Chris sent us this jacket. So it was, in fact, the exact same one that Tina used to put on Shirley's shoulders. What's even crazier is that when picking this artifact, our producers did not know that story. Of course, they knew that Patti inspired Shirley, but seeing her know exactly what it was and having her own story about the artifact is an incredible twist that shows just how deep and connected rock and roll is in our world. This has been Into the Vault with me, Shelby Morrison. This was produced by Jocelyn Gonzalez, Morgan Flannery, Yuri Lizardo, and Melanie Wiggins. Join us next time, and remember, Jesus died for somebody's sins, but not mine.